Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Modern Architecture for Modern IT Resilience. This special webinar event is brought to you in partnership with our friends at Veeam, VMware, and Lenovo. Every IT organization out there today is being challenged with things like application modernization, cloud migration, business agility, resilience, disaster recovery, limited budgets, and yes, ransomware. On this event, our experts from Veeam, VMware, and Lenovo will discuss challenges around modern architectures and today's most innovative solutions for modern IT resilience. Before we get started, you should know my name is David Davis of Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. As always, we want these events to be educational, and we encourage your questions in the questions pane of the audience console. We'll be selecting the best questions during the event and taking those questions live after our discussion. We also have a number of resources there in the handouts tab I want to call your attention to. Make sure that you check those out before the event wraps up. At the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. If you're watching this event on demand, of course, that drawing has already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab. We'll be selecting the best question from today and awarding the person who asked that question an additional Amazon $50 gift card. Of course, you have to ask a question to be entered into that best question prize drawing, and the prize winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions. And with that, I'm excited now to introduce you to today's expert presenters. Welcome, Jeff Reichard, Senior Director for Enterprise Strategy at Veeam; Kyle Gleed, Staff Technical Marketing Architect at VMware; and John Encizo, Field CTO for the Americas Infrastructure Group at Lenovo. Jeff, Kyle, and John, it's great to have you on. Let's go ahead now and turn on our cameras, and I'll hand it off to you, Jeff. Take it away.
Thank you so much, David. I'm really excited to be here today. We've got a couple of great guests that are also going to be on the webinar. We're joined, as you just heard, by John Encizo from Lenovo and by Kyle Gleed from VMware. The format today is going to be a kind of question and answer format. I'm going to be doing most of the moderating. I'll be piping up on occasion, but mostly what I'm going to be doing is asking Kyle and John what they're seeing with their customers around modern IT resilience and modern IT application architectures. So let's go ahead and dive in. One of the things that we here at Veeam do is a large survey of 3,000 customers worldwide. It's actually the biggest data protection survey done by any organization out there, including analyst firms. And we ask questions about where applications are going, about how things are changing, and what the business values are that are driving that. Probably not a surprise to anyone on the call, but in this previous year's survey, we heard a lot about applications moving to new environments, to hybrid cloud, to software as a service, and to new architectures, including Kubernetes. So, John, let me start with you. Why don't you peel back the onion for us a little bit and let us know what you're seeing in your conversations with customers about where their applications are going now?
Yeah, so great question, Jeff. A couple of things that we're seeing happening. Obviously, as customers continue to look at moving to the cloud, application rationalization is becoming increasingly important. And what we mean by that is CIOs, IT teams are looking at the estate of applications that they have. And a lot of these are going to be legacy applications. They're what we'll call monolithic applications. So what we're seeing is that kind of phase one of that, a lot of folks are looking at the, what do I have? What do I have that I can retire? What applications are no longer providing value to the business? For those applications that are no longer providing value, those are being retired out. We're also seeing a lot of folks that are essentially what I'll call time shifting. So they're relocating. They're looking at their applications and they're saying it still provides business value, but it doesn't really make sense for me to go and rewrite this from scratch. So let's just move this to a solution like an infrastructure as a service cloud, whether that's AWS, Google, Microsoft, or they're picking it up and moving it from their existing, let's say, VMware stack on premise, and maybe they want to they want to shift it out to VMware on AWS. But they're looking at transforming those, just lifting and shifting. Once customers kind of go through that initial phase of, okay, what am I going to get rid of and what am I going to keep? Then we get to kind of where we call phase two. And this is where really value discovery and value recovery start to happen. So this is the traditional, do I rewrite it? Do I take it out of COBOL and rewrite it in Rust? Do I re-architect it? Do I break it up? Do I make this a containerized application, start in doing things with, let's say, microservices? Or do I take that existing application and turn it into a microservice-based component? Or finally, a lot of the, and this is the build versus buy conundrum that a lot of folks have, do I just say, you know what, this makes better sense as software as a service. Let me port my data out. So this is where I see a lot of the challenge coming from a CIO perspective, is build, buy, retire, rewrite, relocate, re-architect, replace. This whole application rationalization, because there are business requirements that are driving this, and CIOs have a lot on their plate right now with the limited amount of skills that they have.
That makes complete sense. And I'll just riff on that a little bit. When we talk with customers, again, in the same data protection trends report that Veeam does every year, we also are hearing a lot about those exact same business requirements. When we ask what the biggest drivers are for IT modernization, or to flip it around, what folks hope to get out of digital transformation and IT modernization, the answers that we hear are, we need to keep up with cybersecurity. We need to keep up with changing customer requirements, right? Customers now expect things to be supplied to them on mobile. In the wake of the COVID pandemic last year, we heard from private and public sector customers surveyed that providing remote customer services or remote citizen services became a huge focus, and giving your staff the ability to work remotely. And all of that, of course, drives a different role for IT and different roles for your normal production IT admins and the folks that are running your applications. John, do you want to build on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've got great question on here. What business priorities are driving that? One of the things that the pandemic did is it gave a lot of CIOs a seat at the executive table. I had a great conversation with a couple of CIOs last week, and about a month ago, I got to sit down with a healthcare CIO and really kind of talked about what's happening with IT. Why is the business looking at IT to make this kind of transformation? Security, connectivity, experience. And big CIO initiatives this year that I'm seeing are resilience, impact, and experience. But if we think about IT, traditional IT was, I dealt with hardware, and that's really no longer the case. If we think about public cloud, we think about the push for developers and developer productivity. IT's changing. The role of IT is changing. So it's really moving from this keeper of the data center type role to, it's really becoming, for want of a better word, they're consultants. IT is becoming the consultant for the business around technology. And a lot of so don't get me wrong, core infrastructure is still being governed, is still being managed, but a lot of the traditional functions we think of in IT are actually moving out into the business unit so that the business can actually consume IT services that make sense for the business. I don't want to say aligning IT with the business, because I heard a great quote from a CIO that said, if IT has to align with the business, there's something wrong in the first place, because IT should be, that assumes IT is not part of the business. So we're seeing a lot of this push outwards and governance move in, and that's really where we're seeing IT's role change. But one of the things that cloud has given us is, again, great conversation I had with the CIO, that at the end of the day, the business looks at IT to provide three things: time, value, and money. Every technology that IT purchases, I heard a great quote that says, they were talking about automation, but if the same thing applies, you can't buy automation. You can buy technology to automate, but the business has to do it. It's just like businesses don't buy servers, they don't buy virtualization, they don't buy backup, they buy an outcome. And time, value, and money are those outcomes. And that time, value, and money is really around operational efficiency. It's around precise decisions. It's around customer and employee experience. All those things are what are driving that transformation, or what are driving why IT is so focused on these new platforms, these new ways of doing business, because it allows them to move closer to providing time, value, and money at a faster clip to the business.
Absolutely. And I want to dig into that more in just a second. But Kyle, I was very interested in something that John just said. He pointed out the difference between the sort of big iron maintenance and keepers of the data center and the Ministry of No. And of course, VMware has been for a long time enabling the ability to get to a more agile outcome-based set of results for the business and for IT. And one of the things that listeners might be worried about today is, well, if I am going to move to new architectures, and if IT is going through this transformation, what effect is that going to have on the set of skills that my IT team currently has? How can I leverage those skills? And I know that's something that VMware helps with.
Yeah, it's something we've definitely been focused on for a while. When we look at the idea of an application modernization and these new approaches to application design, application development, the introduction of things like Kubernetes, in parallel to that, we've also seen this kind of introduction of the public cloud. And so now, in addition to having this application modernization effort, there's this idea that you now have a choice on where you run those applications. Your infrastructure is no longer just the data center. Your infrastructure is hardware you own inside your data center. It's hardware you lease. It's also hardware out at the edge. And so as we get into looking at how we manage all these disparate environments, if we have to have a different skill set, a different tool set, a different kind of set of expertise, every time we go to a different environment, that's going to just make the problem more difficult. So at VMware, we've been very focused on providing a common foundation across all these different pools of infrastructure that couples in and ties in very well with these new application kind of centric models like Kubernetes. And that's where we've come up with this idea of the VMware Cloud and VMware Cloud Foundation, and giving you those capabilities. So as you modernize your infrastructure, as you start to adopt these modern applications, placement of those applications is based on the needs of the business, not some limitation of your infrastructure. Mobility, you're not locked in, you can move applications back and forth. And of course, you're doing all this with an existing skill set that you're building on, that skill set being that vSphere infrastructure admin, that person who's built their career around VMware, software-defined compute, software-defined networking, software-defined storage. They're taking those skill sets, they're expanding them out beyond the data center, to the edge, to the public cloud. And we're introducing these new built-in Kubernetes capabilities to provide this platform where we can do all this work so that we can add that business to that value to the business that was being mentioned.
I love this, and it ties in exactly as you point out with what John just talked about. Ultimately, IT isn't about maintaining any kind of a technical environment. That's a means to an end, and the ends are saving the business time, adding value both internally and externally, and adding value to decision making, and increasing the customer experience, which leads directly to the business getting to keep existing. So John, I'm sure that you at Lenovo have also seen this sort of value prop for VMware in the business decisions that you've had with, or business conversations that you've had with customers.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And the conversations that I have, it's not about VMware. It's not about Veeam backup. It's not even about Lenovo. It's about, here's the outcome I need to deliver. Tell me how you're going to assemble my technology stack in such a way to deliver that. And that's where we start talking about, for example, I need to not only be able to orchestrate and automate my applications and migrate them and move them wherever they make the most sense, but I need to do the same for my infrastructure. And then I need to be able to take my data and make sure that my data, which is at the end of the day, everything that we do is in service of providing data that can be transformed into information for our end users. It's tell me how to keep that data safe and secure and be able to figure out a way to monetize it in a faster fashion. That's really why, if you look at, you know, an end-to-end top to bottom stack, we're seeing this transformation. VMware's done a great job with their software-defined data center, where you're able to essentially integrate containers and containers which are 100% focused on the thing that drives the most value out of the data, which is the application. And you're looking at this new model for orchestration that aligns with legacy IT, we'll call it legacy virtualization, right? I have my VMs, and that new cloud native technology, I have containers, and it leverages the skill set. And then you start talking about the data capabilities and being able to back those up and secure them, and then automate things end to end. This is why this modern infrastructure stack has become so important. And this is why we've put so much effort into working with our partners like Veeam and VMware, as well as developing automation for our stack top to bottom to allow customers to deliver time, value, and money faster.
Absolutely. Harkening back to the data protection trends report, again, looking at what we hear from customers about their cloud deployment plans, we got a set of answers when we did that report in 2020. And we asked, what percentage of your workloads do you think are going to stay on physical servers in the data center, are going to move to virtual machines in the data center or remain there, and which are going to go to the cloud? I'm sure you guys have seen the same thing in your conversation with customers too, but last year really, really accelerated that process. I had one CIO, he's the CIO of a large city in Southern California, who said in a talk that I did with him about 2 months ago, that his team accomplished their 4-year remote work and remote citizen services timeline in 4 days in the face of COVID. And that did not involve putting a whole lot of new hardware into their data center, right? That involved moving a lot of things much more quickly into cloud services and into cloud native workloads that they could go with. Now, of course, fortunately, with VMware, we've got the option to do that in VMware up in the cloud, and we've also got the option to do that with VMware on-prem, stretching between those different domains. So Kyle, circling back to you, why don't you talk with us a little bit about sort of what you see customers deploying and where VMware Cloud Foundation fits into that?
Yeah, so VMware Cloud Foundation is, the word foundation is very key to that, because we're really talking about a VMware Cloud. And what I mean by VMware Cloud is we have these components that make up the software-defined data center. We got software-defined compute with vSphere, software-defined storage with things like vSAN and vVol, and we also have our software-defined networking with NSX. And we bring those together into an engineered solution that's a platform. And then we enable our customers to consume this as a service from public cloud providers. So for example, VMware Cloud on AWS or VMware Cloud on Azure or VMware Cloud on Google. Those are all ways that you can go to your public cloud provider and you can purchase or lease infrastructure from them, and you can run the SDDC on top of that. And that SDDC that you run is going to be the exact same building blocks, the vSphere, the NSX, the vSAN, that you're running in your on-premises data center as part of the VMware Cloud Foundation. And then, of course, we can manage all this with our vRealize suite. So it's about this commonality. It's about a consistent way to manage and deploy infrastructure across the infrastructure you own, the infrastructure you're leasing. And as you have this infrastructure, that common building block, that's great. But one of the most important things about this foundation is it has to be easily consumable. And we do that through this concept of a workload domain, where we go in and we carve out pools of this capacity for hosting different types of workloads. So on the slide here, you'll see we can have pools of capacity that are running databases. We have pools of capacity running virtual desktops. We can have pools of capacity dedicated to our developers for running Tanzu and doing Tanzu-based development, as well as artificial intelligence, machine learning. Those are all just examples of this capacity. And then with all this, we have this automation layer that's provided through the SDDC manager. that allows us to go in, and as these different pools of capacity change over time, and as I need to add more servers to one pool, or I need maybe free up some servers from a pool, shrink it, and move those servers elsewhere, so I can drive up utilization of my hardware, and I can help improve the economics of what I'm paying for by improving my hardware utilization. We have all that. So it's a combination of this standardization across infrastructure you own, infrastructure you lease, together with the automation that's provided through these public cloud portals or through the SDDC manager. And then again, getting back to leveraging that common skill set of the vSphere admin in order to capitalize on this. And particularly when it comes to the Tanzu and the VCF with Tanzu, and taking advantage of that built-in Kubernetes capabilities, because now as we approach this new modern world, and it's no longer about these traditional large applications, but it's now about these new container-based applications and these developers and these DevOps communities who are building these. How do we enable them? How do we foster Kubernetes as a service? How do we give them the tools they need so that not only can we run their applications, but they can develop their applications and get access to that data so that they can be very quick and agile in that regard.
Awesome. And I want to go on to Kubernetes and get a little bit more in depth on that in just a minute. But John, I also want to circle back to what specifically Lenovo is doing around helping your customers navigate this. And I think probably this slide, which shows different hardware infrastructure sitting on the bottom, is a great intro to talking about the hyper-converged infrastructure options that Lenovo offers.
Yeah, Jeff, exactly. And it goes back to a couple things that we've talked about. So from a customer's perspective, the first thing I want to think about is the reality of our customers is 85% of them are doing some type of hybrid cloud. And we see this distributed data center fabric. I think Gartner calls it a distributed cloud, where it's edge, enterprise, and public cloud are now the span and the scope of what needs to be managed. And when you think about that, Lenovo, we've developed a portfolio of products we call our Think Agile portfolio. Think Agile VX is our vSAN enabled portfolio. We've done a lot of things, multiple different form factors, whether you're talking 8-socket boxes designed to run enterprise class ERP systems, to single socket boxes in a small form factor designed to enable you to run your small 2-node vSAN cluster at the edge to do AI ML type workloads being virtualized. We put a lot of work, a lot of effort into making sure that we have solutions that span multiple different use cases, so that regardless of where the customer's requirements are from an application perspective, whether they want to consume traditional, what we'll call 3-2-1, 3-tier type server connected to storage, or they want to do vSAN, we've got platforms that let them meet those requirements and then integrate into Lenovo systems management tools, so that a customer can then turn around and very easily manage their infrastructure from that same SDDC platform manager that they're used to, using things like VLCM. And then we also integrate, for example, with Veeam. We've got some designed architecture so that a customer can very easily drop a virtual machine inside their existing environment and start pulling data over to one of our storage platforms to easily give them backup capabilities for VMs and container solutions.
It's really important, and it's enjoyable talking to you guys about this, because there are some kinds of applications that are going to want to live near where the data is. And if we're talking about AI and machine learning, maybe that data is being generated by sensors, and data gravity, the locality of where the data, the mass of the data is going to dictate that's where you actually want the workloads running. And of course, something else that I've seen, and I'm sure you all have encountered it too, especially with Kubernetes, there are applications that are piloted up in cloud environments to get them up and running and built there, and then moved back on-prem. This is a comment my CTO loves to make, but the cloud is not a charity. And so a lot of organizations end up making very careful, thoughtful decisions based on experience about where they actually want those workloads running. And John, Kyle, I'm sure that's something you guys have seen too.
Yeah, and I think what's important to think about it is the decision that was made about where to host an application initially may change over time as well. So it's not just about that initial placement, but it's about the ongoing potential mobility of those workloads as well. That mobility could be an adjustment to some changes in pricing, that maybe there's a cheaper place to run the infrastructure. Maybe it's part of a disaster recovery or some type of business continuity requirement. But again, that decision to, hey, I got an application, I'm building an application, I need to run this application. Where should I run it? Should I run it in my data center? Should I run it at the edge? Should I run it in the public cloud? A decision is going to be made, but once that decision is made, that's not to say that that decision won't change over time. And so that ability to have that common foundation and be able to move those workloads very easily and non-disruptively is key to that kind of this new kind of modern world that we're moving, this multi-cloud world.
Yep.
Yeah, I want to piggyback on top of something Kyle just said. You know, in the past, really IT was very much focused on an infrastructure perspective. Where am I going to deploy infrastructure to run the business of IT? And really what we've seen is a shift where it's now a very workload centric, business IT centric view, where it's where's the data going to come from? Who's the data going to go to? And what are the applications that are going to convert that into valuable information? Where does it make sense for those to live? And then let's either consume or build the infrastructure to run it. It's really happened in the last, I'd say 3 to 5 years that's really started to transform. In the last 18 to 24 months has accelerated that with the move to the pandemic and then the move to public cloud and containers.
Absolutely, which is a perfect intro to a topic we've been talking about a bunch so far, but I'd like to dig into in a little bit more detail now. Let me start with you, John. Where do you think, when we talk about containers, we usually talk about Kubernetes as well. It's the leading orchestration management platform for containerized workloads. Where do you think that fits into the whole hybrid cloud infrastructure picture that we're looking at nowadays?
So I think that's a great question. So, and clarify something. A lot of people get containers, Kubernetes, containers, microservices, and Kubernetes, and they all start to come together in their mind. And the reality is, those are radically different things. So Kubernetes is an orchestration framework, and why that's important is, you know, it's the reason that people don't buy ESXi, they buy vSphere or they buy SDDC, because it's not about just that, you know, a microservice in and of by itself or a container in and of by itself has little to no value. It's only when you truly orchestrate it across your multiple different data locations, public cloud, private cloud, edge cloud, that it starts to make sense. And so when we talk about Kubernetes, we're really seeing a transformation of a mindset on how customers are redesigning the way they're putting infrastructure out. It's a very heavy focus on manage centrally, deploy at scale, and manage your workload, create your workloads to be modular, efficient, and cattle, not pets. That's really what we're seeing. That's the kind of the transformation that we're seeing, and that's shaping the way that infrastructure is getting designed as well. I had a great conversation with a CIO last week that talked about, you know, I want my developers and my application vendors to create their applications with the expectation that they will migrate, move, and fail. I don't want them to rely on the infrastructure to be the only method of availability. And Kubernetes is really your orchestration engine for that next generation application stack.
Absolutely. And Kyle, we've talked a fair bit so far about sort of how VMware supports that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how the whole Kubernetes orchestration and those remote cattle workloads that can move from one place to another fit into that picture?
Yeah, so you know, starting with vSphere 7, we introduced vSphere with Tanzu, which is this embedded capability to run Kubernetes-based workloads directly on top of vSphere. Now, as John mentioned, it's not so much about Kubernetes as it is much about containers and being able to orchestrate containers. So we're moving away from this kind of model where we might have a vSphere cluster that hosts some tens, maybe 10, 20, 30 different applications inside of virtual machines, to this world now where these clusters are going to be used to host containers, and we may potentially have hundreds, if not thousands, of these containers all running. And everywhere I have a container needs to talk to other containers. They need to talk to pods. These pods need to talk to nodes. Nodes need to talk to nodes. And the complexity just gets very, very complex. It goes up very rapidly as the environment grows. And so as we looked at the data center, we looked at what we're doing with virtual machines, the way we can use the vSphere to manage and orchestrate virtual machines. We recognize that there was an opportunity here to be able to take the same kind of principles of centralized management, ease of scale, and embed that directly into vSphere. So what we've done with the vSphere with Tanzu is we've enabled this capability now where a vSphere admin, without being a Kubernetes expert, without having to go in and really train on a new skill set, can go into the vSphere web client, can simply say, I want to enable Kubernetes on this cluster, and it will go out and instantiate a Kubernetes control plane and basically convert each of those hosts in the cluster into Kubernetes nodes. So now I actually have Kubernetes running directly on vSphere. And it's important to understand that when we do this, we're not taking away any of the capabilities we have around virtual machines and our ability to add to manage virtual machines. It's an additive capability in the sense that I can now run Kubernetes-based container workloads directly on the same vSphere cluster side by side with virtual machines, and I have all those rich capabilities available to me. And another part of what we're doing this, so it's not just about making it easy to run Kubernetes, which is kind of what our Tanzu Basic Edition is all about, making it easy to run Kubernetes, but it's also about making it easy to scale Kubernetes. Customers are having to think now, do I have a large number of small Kubernetes clusters? Do I have a small number of large Kubernetes clusters? As my developers come and they want more clusters, do I self-provision? Do I give them the tools they need? And so that's what we're doing with the Tanzu standard is we're basically saying, hey, we'll give these developers a self-access to these vSphere environments where the vSphere admin's in charge. He can control how much access, he can control who can access. So the vSphere admin, the VCF admin is in control. The developers are the customers, but the developers are purely self-service to an environment that looks and feels just like Kubernetes to them. And then also works across that infrastructure you own, the infrastructure you lease, across clouds. And so it's really about building Kubernetes into vSphere so that we can have the same capabilities around containers and container orchestration that we know and love when it comes to virtual machine and virtual machine orchestration.
This is perfect. And I like how consistent this conversation has been. I'm going to jump back and let's just talk again or look again. We dug through this quite a bit, but what you just laid out, John and Kyle, in terms of what Lenovo does for hyper-converged infrastructure and what VMware does with the mobility and the automation of the entire software stack above that does tie directly back to exactly what IT needs to deliver in 2022 and going forward, right? Time, value, and money enabled by workloads that can be made really granular, managed in a very, very automated programmatic way by Kubernetes, and moved to whatever infrastructure makes the most sense given the workload and the data and the dollars involved. It's a very nice connection in terms of how all that works together. So,
100% agree.
Yep. Let's go a little bit more forward because there's a couple of things that we have touched on, but I'd like to dig into them a little bit more. And that's largely because I work for a backup company and Veeam has the leading data protection, data management tool around Kubernetes. Let's dig into a little bit more about what's involved when you move to Kubernetes. And John, I'll start with you on this one. How would you say, in your experience, are Kubernetes and containers shaping the way that development, deployment, and business continuity are achieved by customers?
So it's had a fascinating change in how applications are being developed, but also how the concept of resiliency is being designed. When containers started out, they were essentially ephemeral, which means there was no state information. Right? You spun up a web server. If it failed, you spun up another one. There was no data loss. with Kubernetes and with hybrid cloud, the whole concept of resiliency is now where you want to isolate your state information, back that up, keep that secure, make that highly available, and you want to scale out the ephemeral portions of your application. But in order to do that, you have to really change the way that you're deploying the applications. SQL in containers, for example, is something that you see very heavily pushed by Microsoft, because that gives you the ability to plug that into a container pod, a Kubernetes pod for isolation. But that SQL server is going to have state data. So customers are having to rethink the way that they back up that data. Because let's be honest, anybody that's dealt with Kubernetes knows Kubernetes is a complex and complicated solution. So how do you make something available? Well, you back up not just the data, but you have to back up the state that's going to recreate that functional application unit. And so when we talk about deployment and resiliency, it's deploying things in pods to self-isolate, but also backing up that state information. And that's where Veeam has a product that does this very effectively. So it not just backs up the data, but the state information, because recreating an application stack should not be a complex procedure. If it does, IT loses that time value money capability, right? The RPOs and RTOs are changing rapidly. And so deploying things in containers, deploying things in virtual machines, backing all that up, maintaining state data, making sure that you can scale horizontally and vertically as required by the application and the business needs becomes critically important. Kubernetes gives you the capability to do that. Hybrid cloud gives you the capability to do that. But you have to rethink the way that you manage, deploy, orchestrate, and back up your applications end to end. Otherwise, you're fitting square pegs into round holes again.
I have a great colleague who says basically as an axiom, when you modernize production, you have to modernize protection. And that's absolutely the case. You have to change it. Kyle, let me let you follow up on this. When you look at containers and Kubernetes in particular, how do you see that changing the infrastructure that customers are using or are requiring for business continuity? How do you see that affecting what customers are actually deploying for continuity out in the field?
Yeah, so I'll kind of piggyback on what John said a little bit about, data is king, and at the end of the day, these containers that are running inside these pods inside of our data center or in our public cloud or our hybrid cloud or whatever we want to call that, they're all accessing data in some regard. And one of the things we talked about earlier is as we go into this kind of multi-cloud world where we have infrastructure spread across different locations, and we talk about the opportunity now to have to foster and enable data mobility. How do you ensure that if you move an application that's currently being protected by, say, mirroring into a cloud environment, that it has that same level of protection, and that as your applications move, you don't lose that protection. So you have to be able to coordinate this not just across the data center, but across the entire landscape of your multi-cloud. And then in addition, with the proliferation of the number of Kubernetes clusters and the number of objects, being able to protect that and be able to protect that at scale across these different environments, through policy-based protection. And then also to be able to leverage some of the existing capabilities that we've leveraged for years around virtual machines, things like stretch cluster support with vSAN, or replication with some type of replication capability to basically make sure that data is available wherever you need it, when you need it, and that as you move and as things change, that availability doesn't become a risk, that you don't end up degrading your availability or your data protection because you've now introduced a new cluster or you've moved some data from one place to another. So that idea of the mobility, the idea of it being a very dynamic world that can change quickly. And then, of course, we haven't really talked about governance and locality, but those also come into play as well. So you have to have this holistic view of your data and how you're protecting your data. And you have to be able to, that view has to account for the fact that this data is maybe mobile. that it's maybe spread across many components as opposed to isolated into a single component, and how this modernization is changing the way we look at that and protect that.
And Jeff, I want to piggyback on something that Kyle said, right? Is we've got, in this slide you've got up, we talked about the resiliency. So when we talk about hybrid cloud, we talk about data gravity. A lot of customers, they think that a hybrid cloud solution where part of my application is in the cloud, part is on-prem. Customers are, I think a lot of customers are still confused with high availability, disaster recovery, backup, and business continuity. Those are, business continuity is the larger picture. If you're running let's say a containerized application with data, and you're running it on vSphere, SDDC on-prem and SDDC on AWS, that's great. That gives you high availability. That doesn't give you data resiliency. To your point, there's a reason backup products still exist in this day and age. Just because you've got an application running in 2 zones, 2 data centers, doesn't mean that it's resilient, because garbage, if the data gets corrupted in one place, it's corrupted in the other place, right? So business resiliency is all part of it's again, to Kyle's point, taking that holistic view of the data, the applications, and then the localities.
It's what I love about this conversation, and again, to draw back to an earlier slide, I won't go back there, but we looked at the way that Lenovo's hyper-converged infrastructure basically lets you federate and easily manage and extend and add resiliency to your physical hardware stack and your definition of the network and your definition of storage resources. And obviously VMware does that and then extends it into cloud environments as well. So you've got everything from small remote offices on small Lenovo kit, maybe serving a particular function, to large data centers and extending up into the cloud. And both of you, gents, when you were talking about why you need to protect data, mentioned compliance. And that's kind of near and dear to my heart. I've done a lot of work with public sector. And John, you said in the discussion that you just had, if you can protect even all of your application data, but then you've got to go back and rebuild your application from scratch, you're really going to be hurting if you have an outage. And I know for my public sector customers, one of the big reasons that the ones who have gone to Kubernetes environments look at Veeam's Kasten K10 product, our Kubernetes specific backup and data management application, is all around that ability. If they go through the process of getting something certified to run on their secure network, saying I've got to go back and rewrite my applications or restore from the way they looked 6 months ago when they were first put into production is not going to cut it. That doesn't fly. And I'm sure you guys have the same kind of conversations around security and data retention and resiliency as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, let's be honest. Kubernetes is hard, and when you talk about containers and microservices, the whole reason people are doing that, quite frankly, is because of business agility. Mm-hmm. Well, it's great that I can do 10 releases in a week. How am I backing up my state data? How am I backing up my Kubernetes pod so that I'm capturing all of those changes? How am I using governance capabilities to enforce business requirements and technical requirements across the stack? That's really where we're having, again, to something Kyle said, right? A holistic view, top to bottom. Is how is my infrastructure supported? How is my application enablement layer supported? And how is my application development and orchestration layer supported? If you don't take that overarching view, then you've just created a brand new house of cards. So it's very much critical and important that customers look at, how am I gonna back up everything, protect everything, and automate everything top to bottom. And so your infrastructure provider and your hybrid cloud needs to support that. Your application enablement layer, in this case, VMware SDDC, right, with Tanzu needs to support that. And then how am I going to back all that up? How am I going to integrate into my Kubernetes cluster where Cast and the Veeam products all come into fore?
Yep, absolutely. I have this conversation with customers a lot around ransomware in particular, obviously, where protecting your backups are a key thing. Veeam's Cast-in product does include the ability to make those backups of your Kubernetes environment, including application data and configuration data, immutable, so that even if the bad guy on the network does get admin credentials and go after the backup, they're going to be safe no matter what. Kyle, I'm sure that conversations about security and ransomware resiliency are something that you're having with customers a lot these days too.
Yeah, definitely. You know, as we move into this multi-cloud world and we start thinking about all the different places our data can run and all the different places that we're going to tie in, obviously the governance and security and how we protect that data is very, very critical. And we have a lot of products that we have, Carbon Black and integrations we're doing there, integrations with NSX and security. You know, we have this saying that security is built into every layer of the SDDC, meaning that at every layer, vSphere, vSAN, NSX, there is some element of security built into the solution. So obviously security is a very much at the front of our mind and a very much a focal point for us. And it has to be as you go out and you start to think, hey, we're modernizing and we're going to this new world. But those same principles of how do I protect my data, how do I secure my data, those still apply. And those don't go away just because I modernize. So now I have to take those, build on those capabilities I've had in the past and adapt those for this new modern infrastructure as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. In a second, I'll ask both of you gents to wrap up. But for those who are watching us today, if you would like to learn more and get more detail about any of the things that John and Kyle and I have discussed, please click on any of the QR codes that we have for you here. These will get you more detail about VMware solutions for Tanzu and for the software-defined data center, Lenovo's solutions for hyper-converged infrastructure that supports that kind of mobility and application workload portability, and Veeam's solution to keep all that data safe, whether it's running in virtual machines or physical servers up in the cloud or in Kubernetes environments. So we've gone through a lot today. Thank you so much for your time. I will turn things over to you, John, to wrap up for Lenovo. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Jeff. So as we've talked about, agility, mobility, high availability, capability, all of those things are critically important. And one of the things that Lenovo does as an infrastructure provider, as an enablement layer for every application that you do, is we put a significant amount of time, energy, and effort in making sure that every dollar you spend is a dollar that you're going to realize in value out of that piece of infrastructure. That's why we spend so much time with our Think Agile VX portfolio, based on VMware's vSAN, to actually integrate into those tools to make it simpler for you to deploy, manage, automate, and integrate into whatever cloud you decide to use. Couple that with the work we do with Veeam to give you capabilities to make sure you have data and application resiliency and backup and disaster recovery. That's one of the strong suits for us, is working with our best of breed partners and coming up with solutions that allow you to get on with your business by not worrying about the infrastructure. Transparency of infrastructure so that you can do your business.
Awesome. And that leads in perfectly to Kyle. Do you want to go ahead and wrap things up from the VMware side, Kyle?
Yeah, so at VMware, we're obviously very focused on this multi-cloud world, and our approach is to kind of look at this multi-cloud world as one that where we can standardize across a common set of building blocks, that being the VMware software-defined data center. So we can take those proven capabilities that we have been leveraging for years, vSphere, vSAN, NSX, vRealize Suite, and we can basically extend those out, and we can extend their reach to include the infrastructure you're running locally as part of your data center, those edge locations, as well as out into that public cloud, regardless of your public cloud vendor of of choice. And in addition, we recognize that there's going to be all kinds of different environments, all kinds of different preferences out there. And so it's really about bringing these together on a common foundation to enable a lot of those capabilities that we look for when we think of this world of multi and hybrid cloud, this data mobility, as well as the ability to simplify the deployment and standing up of Kubernetes, the ability to run these both traditional and new modern applications at scale, as well as coming in with a tool set that's going to enable those DevOps and those developers to be able to develop on the platform as well. So it's kind of this bringing all this together into a common platform we call the VMware Cloud. And so regardless of where you're at in your journey, regardless of where you're running infrastructure, you can kind of build on that experience that you already have as part of that vSphere knowledge base, and you can now combine that with the public cloud, combine that with DevOps in order to kind of facilitate your path into this new modern kind of world.
Right back to the holistic view. That's a perfect summary. Thank you, gentlemen, again so much. And thank you to everyone that's been watching us today. We really appreciate your time, and we hope that this was informative and helpful. I will turn things back over to David to wrap up our talk today.
All right, excellent presentation, excellent discussion. I learned a lot, so many wise tidbits of advice there in that, and I brought back all of our expert presenters, Jeff, John, and Kyle. I've also brought up the resources slide there full screen so that everyone can scan those QR codes with your phone and bring up the recommended resources from Veeam, from VMware, and Lenovo. So many great questions have been coming in here during the discussion. We've been queuing up some of the best questions for just a few minutes we have left here in our webinar, and we're ready to take your questions. First question here, I think this one looks like it's for you, Jeff, over at Veeam. Richard is asking, does the transition to 100% cloud require not only a change of technology, but also operational and cultural changes?
Yeah, so Richard, fantastic question. The answer, if you read what folks write about containerization and Kubernetes, you will frequently read about the idea of moving to a DevSecOps mindset. The idea that instead of the old way where you would develop applications and then once they were completely done, you'd hand them over to the IT and ops team and get them security certified, and then they'd be monolithic and out there for the next year until the next big update came. As John mentioned a few minutes ago, that's out the window now. And so when you talk about going to cloud native applications and the Kubernetes and container enabled rapidity and agility of development cycles, you also have to bake security certification into that from the beginning. And so, yes, it's one of the reasons that we're having a lot of success at Veeam with our Kasten K10 product, because obviously backing up all those rapid changes is really important.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. Let's see, here's another good question, and this kind of goes, I think, to all of you really from Bradford. He says, as a Veeam, VMware, and Lenovo solution that was kind of jointly discussed here, where and which vendor does the solution discussion really begin with? Does it begin with maybe a VAR? And what vendor is ultimately responsible for customer satisfaction? John, you want to start with that?
Yeah, thanks. I think I think a VAR is actually a great place to start. Partly because at the end of the day, value-added resellers are called value-added resellers because they've got a closer relationship with you and they'll have a better understanding of your end-to-end infrastructure stack. From a who owns it in the event of something going wrong, it's really about joint collaborative solutions, which is why you want to look to, for example, the solutions we have with VMware and Veeam, where they're jointly developed. So you have a process on the back end to be able to have someone be the main point person, the shepherd, and then seamlessly on the back end handle transitions for if it's a, is it a hardware issue? Is it a software issue? Let that point person be your shepherd as the back-end OEMs work on the process. So there's the overall solution ownership is going to be, I think your VAR is going to be your point person in some of that, and then you'll have a shepherd in the organizations that'll be assigned to help you troubleshoot and get to resolution.
Excellent. All right. Great answer. Thank you. Let's see. Next question, maybe for you, Jeff at Veeam. They're asking, Michael's asking, how difficult is it to restore from a ransomware compromise if you're running Kubernetes?
So if you read the kinds of things that are attacked by ransomware, and threat actors have woken up to the idea that there's more Kubernetes and containerized workloads being deployed out there, and they have started developing attacks that specifically go against those workloads. For the past year and a half to 2 years, I've been reading about this. They target various things. Obviously, they target any stateful containers. They target the secrets that are part of the configuration of a Kubernetes environment so that your environment goes down and you need to restore that. We have found that the recommendation that you'll see for non-containerized workloads, for regular VM, cloud, or physical server workloads, also obtains in the containerized world. If you are backing up workloads, you need to make sure you have an immutable backup solution in place. That is, let's assume your environment has been compromised for long enough and the adversary has moved laterally and escalated privileges enough that they might have storage admin credentials, server or Kubernetes admin credentials, backup admin credentials, so that you need storage resources behind your backup that can't be changed before the time that's set in the configuration, even if someone uses admin credentials to try to do it. And that's what immutable solutions do. The Kasten K10 solution by Veeam does support immutable object storage. It has for quite a while. So it makes a good ransomware proof solution of last resort if you do get attacked.
Yeah, Jeff, and from a Lenovo perspective, our DM storage offers the ability to do immutable storage as well. So you essentially lock those storage bits down. So when you combine what you get with Kasten and then what we offer on our DM storage, you truly have end-to-end immutable backups.
Yep, exactly.
Excellent. And here's a good question, I think, from John out there, who wants to know regarding cybersecurity. Working at a healthcare facility, I'm concerned about the various risks associated with encrypted app attack and zero-day attack. How do we determine which apps are safe for us to use? John, you want to start with that?
That's a non-simple answer. Let's put it this way: if we're talking containers, we're talking virtual machines. The way that you're going to determine safety is you have to do from a supply chain perspective. You have to make sure that all the software bits that you're using to develop your applications are fully vetted and secured by your security team. You want to make sure that your container repositories are backed up, that that developers are only using validated, secured container images. And then once you get from there, then it's really on an application by application basis, right? That's where you work with your applications security team to start looking at what kind of procedure calls do they make? How does the data flow in the application? Is the data encrypted? Are the secrets encrypted? Are the credentials exposed? So, saying how can I say which applications are safe? You really have to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, but start with the bits required to make the application and the flow of data and authentication and authorization throughout the system.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our webinar time slot. There's a lot of great questions. We'll have to try to get back to some of these folks after the event. But I really want to thank our expert presenters on the event today, Jeff from Veeam, John from Lenovo, and Kyle from VMware. Thank you so much for being on the webinar today.
My pleasure, David. Thank you.
And of course, thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us today. Don't forget about the QR codes that are there on the screen. Feel free to scan those before the event wraps up. Also, don't forget about the handouts tab. There are some resources there as well you can download or click on. And with that, I do want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card door prize. This is going out to Russell Stone from Texas. Congratulations. Russell Stone from Texas will reach out to you to deliver that prize, and we'll also be reaching out to our best question prize winner as well. Thank you to everyone who joined the webinar today on modern architecture for modern IT resilience. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.